Elisa Douglas Dois. Hi, my name is Elisa Douglas. I am the student program coordinator here at the Center for Tribal Studies at Northeastern State University. And welcome each of you for joining us this afternoon. And again, so welcome to the 48th Annual Symposium on the American Indian. This session is titled Christianity is an Irregular Verb, an Examination of the Mvskoke Language and Christianity. Just 1 second here. Today we have J5, who is a Mvskoke student at Yale University. And as you probably know, this session is one of many that are included in this year's virtual agenda. Please do take time to visit our website at nsuok.edu/symposium for more details regarding the agenda. All sessions will be recorded and made available in the coming weeks. J5 is a Mvskoke student majoring in American Studies with a concentration in politics and American communities at Yale University. He grew up within the Mvskoke Creek Reservation and comes from the Oji, I should have asked you this, Abova tribal town and Wind Clan. Jay had exposure to both the religions of the Mvskoke people, which also allowed him to explore the Mvskoke language. Jay is a Mvskoke language speaker and encourages fellow Mvskoke to learn, speak, and revitalize their language. As a Bosho fellow, Jay's research examines how Christianity altered and influenced the Mvskoke language while analyzing the various ways Christianity continues to subvert language, sovereignty, and identity within the Mvskoke Nation. Jay will graduate from Yale University in May 2022. And I apologize for butchering a lot of that information there. I should have gotten with you beforehand. But feel free to correct me, and I turn the time over to you.
All righty. Well, Mado Hokti, totally fine. We're all at different language learning levels. So Mado for that introduction. Well, welcome everybody. It's great to see familiar faces. I selected this as opposed to the webinar view because I love seeing the faces. I really do. But welcome. Mojanetta Chihijia Sajo Fachkido Stay. Man Hayui Hitli Yejagacha. Modojages. Moes J5 Jahojef Kudos. Stimmers Kagagi de. But I'm a legada Horokagi. Amidalwa Oji above Tundo. Mon Bags Oklahoma Adit. Spogogi de Lofen, Chajo Jeleje, Mundon, Hayui, Yel Mahabajogo Salwa Hijet, Artues, Moin, Obonaga, Chenhahaya, Ajofachki Tonga, Mado. So, welcome everybody. My name is J5, majoring in American Studies here at Yale University, which is currently where I'm at. So I'm in New Haven, I'm in my college, Davenport College, for some of the Yaleys who are with us today. And today, we'll be talking about three main topics: religion, language, and history. These three topics are very important to me, as well as the Mvskoke people. So I'm going to share my screen, and we're gonna get the party started, y'all. Okay, let me know if you guys can see this. I need confirmation. Can we see this? Okay. All right. So Christianity is an irregular verb. Welcome again. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And we're going to get the party started, y'all. So so I want to take this time to honor those language teachers. The written and unwritten names represent a community of scholars, thinkers, language speakers, community members, and much more. And I want to take the time to acknowledge this kinship network as I've engaged in various conversations with these individuals that have greatly influenced my worldview and as well as my education. And I especially want to thank my family, some of which who are here with me today, my kafko, and then most importantly, so without further ado, I want to preface this presentation as a talk that represents a construction of a history of our language. So as we may know, our language has endured many heinous acts, boarding school, Christianity, and so forth and so on. And through this construction effort, this process represents a struggle to reckon with the past and the present. As I researched and worked through archival text, I recognized that constructing the language's history will require study outside our Mvskoke community. That is, studying the colonial project to renegotiate our language's history is quite complicated, to say the least. And studying the project of Christianity and colonialism puts us in dialogue with colonizers whose intents towards this language and our people were multifaceted, but united in a civilizing and Christianizing purpose. And to revitalize and to protect our language, we must explore various texts of Christian missionaries while putting them into conversation with our own oral history. Now more than ever, our elders deserve more attention as they serve as our living history books. As I begin this presentation, let us recognize that examining the Mvskoke language and Christianity entails history, identity, and emotions. So to start us off, some of you language learners, I see a few in here, and then some of you may not have been exposed to this language instruction. But the question is, what is an irregular verb? We don't typically think in terms of, oh, I'm speaking in irregular verbs. No, but irregular verbs are a part of everyday language. And to our right, we can see to do, to be, to go. These are all examples of irregular verbs that occur in the English language. So then the question is, what is that? What are these words? And irregular verbs, they don't follow common patterns of verb conjugations, yet they make a substantial amount of our English lexicon. Likewise, Christianity can also be categorized with irregular verbs. Christianity doesn't follow the exact rules and patterns as its predecessor, Judaism. We can see Christianity in nearly every aspect of our lives, whether it's law, discrimination, education, and so much more that we encounter. Yet this occurrence is not exclusive to Mvskoke people, right? It occurs in nearly every indigenous culture. The history books may tell us different, but our language reveals the true history of our people. And so as we go through this, this presentation, we're gonna transcend time and text. So we're gonna start by examining colonial text that begin in the 1700s, and then we're gonna go through the time, and then eventually we'll talk about present day. So let's get with it, y'all. So to talk about the language, we must talk about religion, right? Because religion is at the heart of our identity as Mvskoke people, but also the identity of the colonizer. So we're gonna go back to the homelands. And the presentation begins in the 1730s, when a group of immigrants escaping religious persecution from the Catholic Empire arrived in present-day Savannah, Georgia. And as hopefully some of us may know, we call it Igonojali, so the land that is old, that used to be our homeland. The Protestant refugees, known as the Salzburgers, perhaps some of us may have encountered this name or may be familiar with this place. The Protestant refugees, they selected Philip George Frederick von Reck as their leader. And von Reck was in charge of so-called secular affairs. So to the right, we see his cover for his journal. And he maintained a journal and created drawings of his encounters during their efforts to conquer the Mvskoke homelands. And the Salzburgers represent a broader trend in so-called American history. That is, the trend of seeking religious freedom while also, whether aware of it or not, serving as agents of colonialism. And so I provide this example. As I mentioned, von Reck, he was an artist and he was also a Christian identifying person. And perhaps the most remarkable feature of von Reck is his ability to produce drawings while introducing the Mvskoke world to the literary, or the Mvskoke language to the literary world. So keep in mind, this is in the 1730s. America is not even born yet. But von Reck is engaging with Mvskoke people and also documenting what he sees. So a lot of his drawings are animals, trees, things that he has never encountered. And for that, it's very interesting to see the way that he writes. I know this picture is a little pixelated, so forgive me. But if for some of us Mvskoke people here, we can make out some of the words of wayo, fushchada, and maybe not, this word of fushwika. So it's a challenge in trying to interpret what von Reck meant in the 1730s. But that challenge represents an effort to reclaim our past. And so what I like to say about this is this actually represents language change in that von Reck, he actually documents the Mvskoke language, as we can see right here, but he also documents the Yuchi language. So von Reck is encountering many Southeastern indigenous nations, and he's also documenting what he encounters. Not to mention that von Reck also documents some of his words in Spanish and German. So von Reck is a very interesting individual, but I want everybody to take note of his spelling style. So most of us, we can probably make out what this means in English, but some characters, they're just a little funky looking. But some words we can make out and some we can't. So von Reck, as a colonizer, wasn't too invested in spreading the gospel. Rather, his interest was in documenting the trees, the plants, and people. And eventually, von Reck returned to Europe, and the Society of Promoting the Christian Knowledge, an organization dedicated to promoting Christianity on a global scale, eventually published his journal to expose Europeans to the New World. And so I want to make note of this drawing a little bit better, a little more clear, but we see Taji and we see Tafalobi. And again, he's documenting these things in Mvskoke, documenting them in Yuchi, but also drawing these things. So von Reck, I mean, is an interesting individual and he deserves some more attention. But again, he's not interested in spreading the gospel, but rather documenting. His curiosity is what takes over his actions. And as we see, so perhaps the most remarkable documentation that von Reck did was this quote here. He says, again, he's never encountered indigenous peoples, but they believe in a superior being which extends above all things and which has created them. They name it, I don't know what that means. That is, he who sits above. Now, what's interesting about this is, as a Mvskoke language speaker and a student of the language, I don't recognize this word. I absolutely do not recognize this word. One, it's in a different spelling, a different time, so I don't really make out anything. But after spending hours and hours of staring at this and thinking, I finally came across Shudalegadi, which means he who sits in the sky. And this is interesting because this is the first time that von Reck, and this is actually the first time more broadly, that Mvskoke deities are named, right? We're naming them now. We aren't naming them as Mvskoke people, but the colonizers are documenting and naming them through the papers, which then goes out to the world. So this is an interesting moment in time because Shudalegadi is a word that I have not personally encountered. Perhaps other Mvskoke speakers with us today may have encountered this word. But for me, it kind of took me back and thinking about, well, what is our deity? What is our God, right? What do we call our God? And so in thinking about that, I have to reckon with the numerous names for deities that exist within our language. So von Reck documents Shudalegadi, right? But if we go back home to our community or to my community, we see that Ofanga and Ibofanga, those exist. And even so, Hizagidamazi. But Hizagidamazi is interesting in that it's a word created by the missionaries. And we'll get into the complicatedness of that. But what I want to point out to everybody is that von Reck in our traditional world, we believe in this sitting in the sky or sitting above us. So it's an entity, a deity that exists above us rather than a master of X, Y, and Z. And the word Hizagidamazi is also up for ongoing debate about what that means. In English, people say master of breath. Well, that kind of, as a Mvskoke person, that kind of makes me feel uneasy. But if we look at the Mvskoke translation, hizagada, meaning life, meaning breath, and imisi, or mizi. So which one is it? So is hizagada mizi the giver of life, or does he take life? And that is the question at hand. And even more broadly, as we go through this presentation, thinking about what do we keep and then what do we leave behind. So, and really, I have to read this quote. So Christianity started the genocide on our language. It, that being Christianity, wasn't ours, and people shouldn't know that. Now, this quote comes from the Mvskoke media in 2004. And Hilishaya Dadi. This is the Hilishaya of Oji Abova, and he recently, Boya Fiction in Ahyet, this February. And this quote provides us with a foundation for the entirety of the presentation. Christianity started the genocide of our language, and we're going to explore that genocide. And Christianity was not our original religion. And I yearn to follow in Tim's footsteps by informing Mvskoke people about the violent legacies of Christianity. And so the question then arises, how did Christianity serve as a catalyst of genocide, right? How does Christianity do that? Some of us are Christians, some of us aren't. So how does that occur? So one way of discovering this is to look at the publications created by the Christian missionaries. So the three publications that are on your screen right now will all highlight how individuals, but more broadly systems, work to alter Mvskoke worldviews and our overall language. So I want to take note, I want everybody to take note rather, that 1834, 1860, and 1870. Now, as we look at American history and Mvskoke history, these are important times in our history. So let's start with Reverend John Fleming. So Reverend Fleming published The Creek Assistant in 1834. Now, what's significant about that time is 1834 is right in the midst of the Trail of Tears. Some of us are in Indian Territory. Some of us are just now leaving Alabama. So this leads me to believe that Christian missionaries were already in our homelands, already exposing us to Christian views, exposing us to the religion. And 1834 is just keep that in mind, because I mean, that's an important time. We're reestablishing ourselves in Indian Territory, right? And as a result of that reestablishment, the Christians, they capitalize off our reestablishment. We're kind of low in spirits. So to bring us up, they give us the gospel, but also colonize us, whether we're aware of it at that time or not. And Fleming was really an agent of that colonialism and Christianity. So he was a Presbyterian minister, and he actually worked for the Mvskoke Nation and the Choctaw Nation. And so Fleming introduces the upsilon, which is this character right here. Choctaws may be more familiar with this symbol, whereas Mvskokes were not too familiar with that now. Probably back then they were, but definitely not now. And I want to take time to also note what Fleming has wrote, or rather translated and documented, the creation of man. And if we look at the first word, Jehovah, that's the translation. Jehovah really being a loan word from Jehovah, right? And that is what Fleming translates as God. So it's this lost in translation that occurs through the literary world, but also with religions. And we go on to, goodness, this guy, he's a bad cat. I mean, that's just simply put. But Buckner emerges as a true agent of colonialism and Christian efforts. And with the assistance of G. Herod, as we see down here, the superintendent of public instruction of the Creek Nation in the 1860s, they created a grammar of the Creek language. And this is interesting because this is the first time that really a linguistic perspective is given to the language. Buckner takes attention to the way that conjugations occur, the way to make sentences, but he also does something that most, I guess, authors do at this point in time, is create an introduction. And we're gonna get into that introduction here in a minute. But again, I wanna point out the time, 1860. 1860 in Indian Territory was the literal Wild West. We're on the cusp of the Civil War, and that is something to make note of as well. So Buckner is existing in this time, and he truly understands his role as an agent of colonialism. So G.L.I. Herod, and Herod is still an active last name within our tribe. But Herod was a Mvskoke graduate of the Center College, which is a Baptist college in Kentucky. And this is interesting because Herod is like many of the modern Mvskoke students, right? We come from our community, but we also go off and get an education. And then we come back to our community with a new worldview, right? And so Herod is really a representation of us, in my opinion, but he also helps Buckner. So how do we kind of accept his work as a superintendent of Mvskoke education, but also his work with Buckner? And to our right, this is actually from his wife. This was an interview that was conducted through the Indian Pioneer Papers. And Buckner actually served for the Confederate Army. So going back to Buckner, not a great man. So Buckner engages in salvage ethnography. And basically this concept is the Indians are dying and we are going to document everything that they do, everything that they engage with. And we're not going to really do anything with that other than, as Buckner says, put it in our picture gallery that their recollection may never fade from our memories. And reading this as a Mvskoke person, it really gets you going. And Buckner is quite aware of his intentions. I admit that our first great care should be to give them the consolations of Christianity and grant them Christian burial when they die. So he wants to document the language, but he also wants to Christianize our people. So the question then becomes, what is more important in Buckner's work, the documentation of the language or Christianizing Mvskoke people? And as we go on, in Buckner's introduction, we really see his intentions. They are now, however, on the eve of a mighty and rapid change. Now, we can argue we're also on the eve of a mighty and rapid change. We're still going through COVID. But what's different about this is that we can hold out. But as Buckner says, they can hold out no longer. So Buckner realizes his power as a missionary, but his power as a white man coming in to so-called save the language, right? And he goes on to say, more than all, Christianity has at great length caused greater changes for good. Again, Buckner is aware of his power, but he's also aware of the broader history of indigenous peoples, right? Their old customs are giving way. Husbandry and agriculture have supplanted the chase and the war dance, which is our true form of religion. And prayers and hymns of praise to God have taken the place of reveling and war hoops. Now is the only favorable time to save their language from utter oblivion. And this is the only way. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you might have heard something similar to this, perhaps in a church, perhaps in a sermon. Now is the time to give your life to God. And this is the only way. So essentially, Buckner is preaching through the pages. He recognizes what he's doing. Now is the only favorable time to save the language. Why is it now? Why is it, Buckner? But he also argues that this is the only way, which we can argue is a Christian ideology. There is only one way, right? And so Buckner He knows what he's doing. And I mean, reading this the first time, I was livid. I was upset. And because as a Mvskoke speaker and one who attends the ceremonial grounds, everything he says, I refute. Perhaps the most funniest, or rather hypocritical moments in Buckner's introduction is that the Creeks, in common with all nations not under Christian influence, have been accustomed to oppress their females. And I allude to the old custom of having one dialect for the men and one for the other. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this has got to be one of the funniest things you have ever seen, I hope, in terms of language, right? He believes that we're oppressing females by having two distinct languages for men and for women. But perhaps the most laughable clause, the Creeks, in common with all nations not under Christian influence. Now, the funny thing about that, if we look at our history, we notice that oral history will tell us that there was at a time when men and women spoke differently. There was a time. But why is it that we don't have the women's talk today? Ladies and gentlemen, we could say that it's because of the Christian influence. Because when we look at who is helping Buckner, is it Mvskoke women or Mvskoke men? And so this is a point in time where Buckner realizes that gender plays a role, but he's recognizing too that patriarchy is now going to overtake the Mvskoke culture. And his reasoning behind this is because one dialect for men and women. And this deserves some attention to. So we're going to kind of fast forward a little bit and then we're going to come back. So just bear with me. So Hokte and Bonaga. Again, oral history tells us that there was men's and women's speech. And the evidence that we can find in academia, so-called academia, is in Korsari Bonaga. And Korsari is kind of a relative of the Mvskoke language. And Korsari is spoken in Texas and Louisiana and a little bit in Oklahoma. But Mary Haas, if you're familiar with the Mvskoke language, she was the Mvskoke linguist. She actually attended Yale, so I like to think I'm following in her footsteps. But she also spent time in Oklahoma engaging with Mvskoke people. James Hill, the Gouges. I mean, Mary Haas is just an iconic linguist for Mvskoke people. And she took the more descriptivist linguist approach. She documented. She didn't say, this is wrong, this is not how it should be, things of that nature. Again, that's linguistic talk. We're going to get rid of that. So Mary Haas provides examples in the Mvskoke language. Women's forms end in a long vowel with a falling pitch stress, while the corresponding men's forms shift the stress to the penultimate syllable, altering it to a high pitch stress. In addition, shortening the long vowel and adding S. So again, this is kind of written in phonetics. Linguists love to write funny and make it inaccessible to language learners. But as we can see, these characters and their marcations represent tone, which is again a facet of our language that no longer is prominent. Some people will speak in tones and some people won't. And there's a reason for that. It all goes back to Christianity. And I mean, we can look at some of these phrases and kind of make them out. But again, I just want to make note that women's talk was a thing in the Mvskoke language. It definitely was. But now it's nearly obsolete. And why is that? Christianity. So now we're going to go back in time. We're going to post-Civil War, just a little bit. Again, a Reconstruction era. So we have to reconstruct from the trail, and now we have to reconstruct from the Civil War, the aftermath of the Civil War. And out of this comes the infamous Treaty of 1866, the so-called Reconstruction Treaty. And out of that really comes our educational systems. Now, what's unique about Mvskoke educational systems is Yes, they were founded by Christian missionaries, but these missionaries also recognized the importance of Mvskoke identity and that the naming of these institutionals, they were named after tribal towns and significant places rather than the missionaries themselves. There was no Adawite mission. There was Tallahassee, there was Nuyaga, there was Wiyalaga. And so that was a recognition of one, Mvskoke sovereignty, but also two, the importance that Mvskoke people played in formatting and creating our own educational systems. And these educational systems served as sites of knowledge, language production, and education. And so perhaps one of the most famous, I wouldn't say the famous, but up there is Lockeridge. And Lockeridge contributions to the Mvskoke language is just amazing. I like this guy, I really do. In that he, along with the help of Dave Hodge, created the first Mvskoke dictionary. And this was created in 1890. Folks, if you don't know, the most recent dictionary was created in like 1990. So it's literally been 100 years. And this is something that people today still utilize, often referred to as the gray or red dictionary. Y'all know what I'm talking about. This is that document. And Lockeridge, he actually served as the superintendent to Tallahassee and Coweta missionary. And Lockeridge, I mean, his contributions to the language were just magnificent. I mean, this guy, he really took the time to engage with Mvskoke people, but engage in a way that didn't subvert Mvskoke religious sovereignty, but rather he kind of resembles Von Reck in that he's more interested. He wants to document these things. And the greatest contribution by far is the verb conjugations. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with Mvskoke, Mvskoke has a very, very intricate verb system. I mean, we have 5 tenses, and we have patient markers and agent markers. Again, linguistics talk, but forgive me. But for an English speaker learning Mvskoke, this is a completely different ballgame. It's not like Spanish, it's definitely not, because our language is so intricate. It accounts for time, mood, and all these things that English lacks. But Lockeridge provided this verb paradigm that people, again, still utilize today. So Lockeridge's contributions are still utilized today. And that is a testament to him as a superintendent of Mvskoke education, but also to our language, because we can come back to this and say, well, how does that vary from today, how we speak as Mvskoke speakers? And that examination process allows us to kind of think more broadly about language change. So to kind of get into things now, we're gonna shift now. So that was 1890. Statehood occurs, we lose land, the allotment. I mean, there's a lot of terrible things that occur from 1890 to today. I mean, that could be a whole nother talk. But instead, I'm gonna provide just 3 little short tidbits. So the Mvskoke language today is spoken by less than 250 Mvskoke speakers. And this is recently, this number came from the Mvskoke calendar that the Mvskoke language program produces. And they kind of give a rough estimate, 250 for a low ball and 500 for a high. And this is an alarming number. I mean, if we think about how many speakers we know as Mvskoke people, this is about how many we can think of, right? And so our language, again, has undergone a lot of violence, a lot of change, and it's ultimately up to us to kind of change that narrative and to reimagine a new future for Mvskoke people. And Mvskoke religion, again, so some of you may be asking, okay, Christianity isn't the original religion of the Mvskoke people, then what is? And Mvskoke religion is a land-based religion, meaning that our religion needs land. We need kinship. We need relations to the land, but also those who participate in the ceremony. And these occur at or tribal towns, also known as ceremonial grounds. And today, there's only 16 alive, 16. Whereas in the homeland, there was close to 60 and 70. After removal, 44. Today, 16. But why does this occur? Again, Christianity. But the Mvskoke religion utilizes the language while practicing ceremony that honor land, animals, and kinship. And I want everyone to take note of our primary celebration, our religious ceremony, our Christmas, if you will, is the green corn ceremony. And that is known as Mvskoke. Mvskoke. And Mvskoke kind of means to fast, both literally and also spiritually. And so now is the time in the presentation where we kind of go back in time, but we're talking and relating these things to today. So to our left, we see a short story from the Mvskoke Second Reader, which is a publication that derived from the Tallahassee mission. And Robertson and Winslet, these were all like students and like superintendents and principals of these educational systems. But through their work, they also produce a lot of language materials. And these language materials promote Christian notions of time, of body, of self, I mean, of everything. And one of the primary examples is this passage here. The little girl that is hurting. And what's in the underlying portion, can you help the girl? Can you help the girl? And it goes on to say, no, nobody can help her. Only God can help the girl during her time of sickness. So the question arises, why is it that only God can? And again, it furthers this notion of God. God is the answer to our suffering, right? To this girl's suffering. And the passage goes on to talk about, you're gonna hurt, I'm gonna hurt, we may all die soon, but we need a strength to get us through death. And what is that strength? The love of Jesus Christ. And so this really furthers Christian notions of, religion and self, and what does it mean to overcome suffering. And in thinking of suffering, I offer this example of haji inokida. So we're going to the right side of the screen. Haji inokida, it literally translates to the monthly pain sickness. And this is a word that derives from Christian missionaries, and it refers to menstruation. Now, the interesting thing about this is that today, some people use that, some people don't, but it's still a word that is widely used, I would say, in Mvskoke communities today. There's other words to refer to it. And perhaps the what you would call the traditional, the OG word would be this idea of iboshkida or iboshkat in its nominative form. So iboshkat really refers to the letter E is kind of reflexive pronoun, so referring to oneself. So literally cleaning oneself is the translation of this word. And I was first introduced to this word by wonderful language teachers, Rosemary, Maxie McCombs, and also Becky Barnett, tremendous language teachers. And this really opened my eyes, because if we look at boshkida and iboshkida, we can see the similarities in the word, right? And we recognize that iboshkida is on the same level, the same connotation as boshkida. So in our Mvskoke worldview, we give the honor and respect to iboshkida as we do as boshkida. And in an effort to remove us from our traditional religion, the missionaries say, no, we don't talk about boshkida. We don't talk about iboshkida. Instead, it's referred to as haji inokida. And so we take that and internalize it and utilize it to today, to where most people, again, still do say this word. And so this is an example of how they assimilate us, but they also civilize us in formulating our language, right? It's our language. But when the authority is no longer on us, is it our language? And that is the question that I pose to everybody in thinking about more broad things, right? Not just our language, but land, kinship. I mean, even your body, right? And at this moment in time, when Nokida in Mvskoke comes, it's really a subversion to our Mvskoke women. So not only are we taking away from their language, but we're also going to impose this new word to further notions of time, whereas Hazi referring to time. And we're going to impose it upon our Mvskoke women. And so, you know, some of you may have heard the colonizers, they treat our land like they treat our women, you know, similar to our language, right? And we see that through this example. And in thinking about time, this is always a fun one. Notions of time, right? In the Mvskoke worldview, Monday wasn't a day. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, literally any of these times, months necessarily weren't a part of Mvskoke times. Instead, we're cognizant of our nature, our environment, how we live. And the moon and the sun really dictated notions of time. And when the Christian missionaries arrived, we had to go to church on Sunday. So what is Sunday? Tojagoji, meaning the little sacred day. Okay, then that prompts the next question of, well, what is the sacred day? Christmas. Then and that's what we refer to as Christmas, the Jagotako. It's the big sacred day. And again, to further notions of time, Christianity notions of time, we utilize this word today. Now, some people in the community might say Sunday, which is a Mvskokified form of Sunday. And it was actually my great-great-grandfather's name, Sunday Fife, which, anyways, but that's something that I like to point out. But Tajagoji, it is the little sacred day. And even like notions of like Monday, Narijiska, this is the beginning, right? Whereas the education system says, no, the beginning of the week starts on a Sunday. Well, why does it start on a Sunday? Because that is when Christianity starts their week. They started by going to church, by having services. That's when the week starts. But we go to school and we say, Monday's the first day. Why? Because that is the first, forgive the rumbles in campus. A lot of people like to drive up and down the streets. Anyways, why is Monday the first of the week? Because of capitalism. We start the week off because that's when we go to work. We reserve Sunday for God, for religion. And we reserve Monday for beginning to go to work, 8 to 5, or whatever that may be. And so we see this, we see how this changes and reflects our view of time in the Mvskoke language. For example, like, I want to say it's Friday or Saturday, we call it Figapkanita. We rest on that day, right? And so again, it's kind of implying that you need to take a break. From what? Is it religion, or is it from our capitalist job that we engage with nearly every day of our lives? And so time also becomes something, it becomes an agent of change in our language. And finally, this one, you're gonna have to think with me, okay? So colors. Now, I'm not sure how many people are familiar with different languages, but different languages perceive time and colors and numbers in different ways. So the way that your first language is gonna determine how you view the world, okay? So in the example of orange is on the color spectrum. I'm actually taking a QR class, so I know what I'm talking about, just a little bit. Orange is next to red and yellow, right? And it's also the combination. So in Mvskoke, we really didn't have a word for orange. Rather, when the Spanish brought over the oranges and gave us the fruit, then we recognized it as yalaja. But what is yalaja? Yalaja is a loan word from the Spanish naranja. So this leads me to believe that orange as a color did not exist in our language. Rather, it was chadi or lani. And lani is also another complicated example because lani refers to yellow, green, and brown. So again, these notions of colors, these are all worldviews, our time bodily functions, colors, they all reflect how we perceive the world that we exist in. And to bring us to today's time, language change. So language change occurs in three manners: acquisition, production, and interaction. So the way that you acquire a language determines if a language is changed. And this more applies to second language learners. I am a second language learner, unfortunately. I wish I was a first language learner. But as a second language learner, I bring my English perception of time, of numbers, of speech into the language. And by doing that, whether I recognize it or not, I change the language. Well, why does it dissonance conform to my style of speech, right? And I'm sure many of us language learners can be guilty of this one, because acquisition, it all has to do with community, who you learn, how you acquire it, and when, right? You can't just acquire it overnight. You got to build that relationship. And so from acquisition, we go to production. How do you produce the language that you speak? What styles do you speak? Do you speak men's? Do you speak with a country accent? I mean, these are things that we kind of joke around with in English and in Mvskoke. But really, the question is, what style of speech do we modify, embrace, or reject? And those three lead to language change. And finally, language change occurs in interaction. So how speakers interact determine how the language change. For example, if I'm speaking with somebody from Florida or a different tribal town, we're going to interact differently and speak in a way. Our production and acquisition is going to be so different that our interaction is also altering the language, whether aware of it or not. And so, kind of getting to the end, I know I'm getting close to time, but how is Christianity a regular verb? So perhaps you've been pondering of this when I said Christianity is an irregular verb. And it all comes down to worldview and identity. Christianity is a learned worldview. It is learned, and it is indoctrinated through practices and rituals of the church. We have to learn to become Christian. And like an irregular verb, Christianity becomes accepted and employed by various peoples. And in the case of Mvskoke Udalwa, we have embraced Christianity, whether we're cognizant of it or not. On the flip side, as Mvskoke people, we enter this world with an inherent kinship system that connects us to people, land, communities, and the past. Yes, we learn to become Mvskoke, but we don't need the church. We don't need a sermon. We don't need a hymn or salvation to be Mvskoke. To be Mvskoke, we must embrace Mvskoke values that they taught us. And to conclude, language and religion. Language serves as the foundation for Mvskoke religion. Without our language, we do not have a Mvskoke religion. Without our Mvskoke religion, then state the we are. Who are we? Who are we without language and religion? And in thinking of who are we must make a conscious effort to revitalize our language by reckoning with our Christian past, but also embracing our future. We are the ones that can determine what we accept, modify, or embrace. And again, Christianity didn't serve as our original religion. So it is an irregular verb. And to conclude this presentation, I leave you with a quote from my great-great-grandmother, Louisa Lowe. And my great aunt, Jimmy Carroll Stewart Fife, told me this quote in a handwritten letter, which I wish I had with me, but it's at my house. She says, quote, "Talk about the ones who have gone on and they will never be gone. But when you quit talking about them, they will leave and be gone from us forever," end quote. It is my hope that we are all able to continue to talk in Mvskoke and English about the ones who carried on our language and our traditions, about the ones who taught us their vast knowledge, and about the ones who have traveled, to embody visionaries of Indian country. It is our responsibility to continue talking about our language, those who have gone on, and even those who are yet to come. So I'm going to open it up for questions. Let me stop sharing so I can see y'all's faces. Okay.
Mado, Jay, I really appreciate you sharing all of that information with us today. I know I've seen many fellow Mvskoke and Seminole people joining us today, so I know that they're very interested in what you had to tell us about the relationship between the language and Christianity. Very, 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 very informative. I really appreciate it. We probably have time for maybe like 1 or 2 questions, and then I really wish we had more time, but and I would like to quickly point out that if you're joining us today, there is a link in the chat that is links to our survey. So if you have a moment, please click on that link and complete that for us. We'd really appreciate your feedback. I am not seeing anything at the moment, but again, like many are saying, hijli mai. Yes, this will be available to watch. We have recorded it and we'll make available to those who have registered. And so we'll be sharing that probably like within another week or so. And I just want to quickly point out, just for myself, that hearing you talk really resonated with me because my dad, who is a fluent speaker, there's a lot of conversations that I have with him that reminded me of some of the things that you mentioned as far as like the literal translations of the word and how that relationship is to our traditions and our culture. And so, you know, we have some family that live on a reservation in Florida. So when we make those trips, there's a lot of place names along the way that are very, 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 like probably very similar to what I did at the very beginning of the presentation, butchered it. But it's really nice to be able to speak with a fluent speaker who has that knowledge and that information of breaking down the words and taking a word that was not written until or you were maybe you weren't familiar with what it was trying, the word was, how it was written and how it should be said. But when you thought about it, you really related it to a Mvskoke word and then connected that meaning to what you knew. And so I just really appreciated that. And like I said, it just resonated with me. So we'll just, if you have any quick last minute comments, then you can take the time to do that and then we'll end it. Do you have any final comments?
No, just glad to see everybody. I mean, this is a good turnout and make me happy to see a lot of familiar faces and a lot of new faces too. Man.